All right, hi everyone. Once again, I hope that this is finding everybody safe and well. And today we're going to be continuing our discussion of the living environment. So, a couple of weeks ago, we discussed Peter Singer, who had a powerful argument for animal welfare. But as we saw, there's people who disagree with him, both because they feel like he was going too far, and because there's others who disagree and say he wasn't going far enough. So, in our last session, we discussed someone who agrees with Singer, but showed how following Singer's reasoning might take us to conclusions that many of us might feel a bit uncomfortable with because they conflict. There's a conflict between ecology, nature, and animal welfare, at least on some views. So, today's author is picking up that theme, but this is someone who would generally disagree with Singer. Now, Sagoff, the guy who wrote this paper that we're looking at today, he does agree with Singer to an extent in that he objects to the way that society treats domesticated animals. And that's not really surprising. You're not really going to find many people who would try to defend the factory farming system, other than the people who actually profit from it, or many other aspects of how animals are treated in modern society. But what he does oppose is the application of Singer's ideas to environmental policies. McMahon wanted to extend not only negative moral rights to animals, but at least one positive right, the right to physical security. And on the other hand, we might have trouble justifying why animals should get negative consideration but not positive consideration. Taking many of these positive considerations too seriously might have very serious consequences for nature as we know it. So, Sagoff points out that positive rights don't just stop with physical security. There's also the right to food and shelter and medical care. And if you start to take these ideas seriously, there's not going to be much left but a giant zoo out there. But you don't have to consider positive rights or some kind of far-fetched fiction scenarios like the one which McMahon was considering. There's times when, unfortunately, even granting animals the basic core negative right not to suffer violence or not to have violence inflicted on them would have bad ecological consequences, including possibly even worse animal suffering in the long run. So, this is reflected in cases like animal population and invasive species and the way that those problems are generally handled, which is more often than not taken care of by simply slaughtering the population that's deemed to be out of balance. So there's plenty of examples in this. In the slides, we talked about wild horses and donkeys in the American West. On Wednesday, we're going to look in detail at a specific case, which is elephant populations in South Africa. But there's lots of other cases. For instance, the Australian government has declared war on cats, on the cat population. So someone like Singer or Francione, or someone such as myself who's interested in animal welfare, we'd certainly like to see this handled in a different way. And even people who aren't particularly animal welfare advocates, they still instinctively recoil from this kind of mass killing. But to be fair, alternatives are often very difficult to find. And as Sagoff points out, the desire to be merciful is going to conflict with respecting and preserving the natural world. So Sagoff's philosophical inspiration is one of the fathers of the American conservation movement, Alvin Leopold. And Leopold had a philosophy known as the land ethic that we'll discuss, in a lot of detail later in the course, basically throughout the rest of the course, which calls for an ecocentric ethical system. And what that means in a nutshell is this. What's important are the components of the ecosystem. Species of plants and animals, geographical features like mountains and rivers, forests, even the soil. So the harmonious functioning of the whole takes priority over the life or welfare of any organism inhabiting the system, and that includes human beings. So Leopold had a lot of influence, not only on environmental philosophers like Sagoff, but on practical decision makers in the US and elsewhere. And at least as far as taking the balance of nature to outweigh the welfare of individual non-human animals that make it up, his outlook on that was pretty influential. So you can still ask a lot of questions about this. One is like, hey, this all sounds great in theory, but Some may still object to the sacrifice of lives to an abstract idea like the ecosystem or nature. And we'll still have the same questions that McMahon raised, such as like, why is a species, after all, a species is something that doesn't even really exist as an entity. Why should a species outweigh the welfare of the individual creatures that make it up? And because those creatures certainly do exist. And we might also ask, hey, what's so great about nature or natural balance in the first place? Or why should we want to keep nature frozen in time, like at a certain specific state? So, all right, think about these issues and stay safe and take care, and we'll finish up this unit on Friday.